I want to talk about this, and I'm just going to go right off the cuff here, with almost no forethought, because I just saw Westy just did a video where he praises Grand Bazaar as the height of fucking urban combat in Battlefield. I'm seeing so much praise of late for Battlefield 3, like it was the best thing ever, as if somehow the fucking netcode doesn't ruin the experience. I'm sure we all remember, or at least we should remember, how often you just died while hiding behind cover and, shots not registering, dumping mags into people and having the bullets just go right through them. Yeah, it's brilliant, guys. Granted, that was a problem in Battlefield 4 too. It was only because of Dice LA stepping in to, you know, plug the holes and bail out the water in the hold that that ship didn't sink. People's view of Battlefield 4 is also quite rose tinted. But I'm going to talk about Battlefield 3 here because um, the nostalgia for it, I just don't get it. I have the suspicion that a lot of it comes from the fact that it was the first really popular Battlefield game, combined with the fact, so there's nostalgia going on for it, combined with the fact that a lot of the people who played Battlefield 3 and were really into it came from Bad Company. And there were a lot of people at the time, uh, like old BF2 vets, who would disparagingly call Battlefield 3 Bad Company 3, because a lot of its game design was derived from the Bad Company games, not from Battlefield 2. And this is part of my criticism, actually, um, especially in terms of the map design, especially the vanilla map design. Battlefield 3 was not not very good at all, if I'm being honest with you. And Battlefield is, I mean, it's in the name. The game lives and dies by the maps. Um, and I'm sorry, but the ones on offer on launch just don't fucking cut it. Let's take Grand Bazaar as a great example. Grand Bazaar is not really a great map. Not in the way that it's usually played. Most people, this being Battlefield, play Grand Bazaar in 64 player Conquest. In 64 player Conquest, the map turns into a goddamn clusterfuck. Um, where you have this center uh, alleyway where people just sit there and mag dump down the alley, uh, hoping to, and usually killing anybody unfortunate enough to pop their head out. And then you've got a few people who actually have brains, plus the guys in the APCs who drive around the other two lanes on the left and right side of the map down the street, where there's very little cover, and try to get in behind them. Of course, when you do that, you end up right in the middle of the enemy spawn areas, so you can both end up just shooting people as they spawn or getting shot in the back because somebody spawned behind you. You end up in a rat's nest, and you usually don't have much backup because, again, people are dumb. And if they see a big long corridor with that's basically just a shooting gallery, where they can rack up lots of points either by dumping bullets down it or continually reviving and healing and passing out ammo to people, they're going to do it. I should point out these. You'll notice that a lot of the alleyways in that map are very narrow. It's not the kind of thing that you'd want to shove a lot of people down. The game clearly has a three-lane structure. It is very and it's literally a square. It's a three-lane square. It is so obviously a TDM map. Grand Bazaar is a TDM map. It's not a conquest map. It's not designed for that game mode. And it turns into a clusterfuck when you try to play it in any other game mode. Grand Bazaar should be limited to TDM. That is where you get the best player experience out of it. With a lower player count, like a couple dozen guys running around on this three lane box, just like most COD maps are three lane boxes. But no, this is Battlefield, so everyone plays everything 64-player Conquest. This is also how you end up with clusterfucks like Metro. Metro proves that the bad company mindset hadn't quite gotten itself out of their heads yet. They did buy Battlefield 4. By Battlefield 4, Rush was basically like, who plays Rush? None of the maps were designed for it. It didn't play very well, and as a result, nobody bothered with it. It was Battlefield 4 was a classic conquest-oriented battlefield, despite its other problems, especially at launch. Battlefield 3 had maps that were variously designed for various game modes, but allowed you to play any game mode on any map. So Grand Bazaar was a TDM map, but you could play 64-player Conquest on it. Metro, given how absolutely narrow and choke pointy it is obviously designed for, well, I'd say it's designed for Rush, which it is, but fundamentally, more fundamental than that, it's designed for console because the last gen consoles, I mean we're almost in the next gen consoles, but speaking is in terms of the current consoles, the previous gen consoles couldn't handle 64 players online at once. So, when it was decided that they were going to make a Battlefield game, Bad Company, for consoles, they had to try and figure out a way to make the combat as intense as in Battlefield 2 and 2142, where you have 64 people on a large map, and so there's a bunch of shooting going on because there's a bunch of players on each team. They had to try and figure out a way to make an intense battle experience with only 12 people on each team. And the way that they did that was that they invented a new game mode called Gold Rush, later just Rush, um, where everybody was focused on two very particular points in two very particular rooms or little areas on the map. And so even though there were only 24 people, you would have like all 24 people crammed into this one little area on this rather narrow map, which gave you an intense gameplay experience despite the fact that there weren't a lot of people. And Metro is derived exactly, caters exactly to that kind of game design. The choke points in Metro are so narrow. The only way it works is if there's only a few people guarding each choke point, and therefore you can sort of get through it by, winning the gunfight, the initial gunfight at the choke point, and then pushing through because it's not like there's anybody behind them. But again, on PC, this didn't apply because on PC everybody plays with 64 players and it's played on Conquest, not Rush, which means that, well, first of all, the US team always loses, usually, because the map design is based around the US team attacking in Rush. So they attack through the park, down into the subway tunnels, up into the upper subway platforms, and then out onto the street. It has that sort of progression to it. Rush is good at that. It feels like you're advancing. But that kind of map design doesn't lend itself well to Conquest. It doesn't lend itself well to giving one side a map advantage over the other, because in Conquest, both teams are attackers. There is no attacker and defender. So the US team gets flag on the lower platform, and the Russian team gets the flag on the street. And then the Russian team also usually gets the flag on the upper platform at the top of the escalators because they have the height advantage. And they can just fire grenades and rounds down the escalator, or they could just camp behind the escalators and shoot anybody who tries to come up them. And there's no way to flank them. There's no flanking route. It's something that's designed. The escalators are something that's designed to be, and the stairs on the side are part of the map that's designed to be forced. and it's designed to make 12 people versus 12 people, force them together, and have them have a big confrontation. But here you have 32 people. You have three sets of stairs. You have, well, one set of stairs and two sets of escalators. So, practically speaking, you have 11, even if you split your forces evenly, you have 11 people watching each set, uh, 10 watching one. So, at that point, it basically becomes impossible to actually push through because, you know, defeating, four people in a straight up gunfight, even at a choke point, I mean, that's doable. Defeating 11 people bunched up at a choke point, lobbing endless grenades at you, that is, unless you're considerably more skilled than them. And this is how you get, this is how you get infamous Metro uh, back rape montages where somebody is just blatantly better than everybody else, and so they just brute force their way past one of the choke points and then run in behind everybody else and just shoot them all in the back. But barring that, it's basically impossible. So the U.S. team always loses. They just get spammed to death. The Russians just stand back and get an easy win, and that's the match. It's terrible. A lot of people liked it for reasons that I imagine have to do with some sort of constant, I don't know, dopamine fix. Like, ooh, shooty, I get to just sit in corner and just continually fire my grenade launcher into other corner upstairs or downstairs and get lots of points and lots of kills, even though I'm just standing in basically the same place for 15 minutes. Also, it allowed you to easily rank up and unlock stuff for guns. By the way, hate the progression system in Battlefield. They should just do away with it. There's no real reason for it to exist other than Skinner box sort of, yeah, like a Skinner box sort of um, player retention mechanic. Honestly, though, if you require, what was the thing? I was just bitching about this yesterday, about how I'd never actually gotten the laser sight on my 412 Rex in Battlefield 4 because you had to have 60 kills with it in order to unlock the laser sight and therefore make it like actually useful in close quarters, which is what a pistol's supposed to be for. Um, why should you have to get 60 kills in order to unlock something that makes the weapon one like flagrantly, blatantly better than the stock version? Uh, because progression, there's no logic to it. It just people want it axiomatically for some reason, and the game designers put it in there because they know that they want it. They know that this sort of mindless, endless unlock thing where, oh, you unlock the next attachment on your gun, oh, you unlock the next gun, etc. Even though there's all this does is put options that the player could be using behind arbitrary grind walls, basically. It's basically grinding. Um, and I know there's people who like to grind. I'm just surprised that they're playing first person shooters instead of, you know, an MMO. Anyway, back to Metro. Metro is not the only example of this. Damavan Peak is perfect. People praise Damavan Peak all the time as epic. You know what? I think Damavan Peak is epic for precisely one reason, and that is the first section, because you get to jump off a cliff after it. You get to parachute off of a cliff. But other than that, Damavan Peak doesn't work. It works as a rush map, certainly. Not 64 player. This was another big mistake, was that rush in Battlefield 3 was 64 play. It could be any player size, and thus people naturally just went 64, but the maps aren't. Rush is not designed for 64 players. It never was. It was specifically designed for 24 players to concentrate the action so that 24 players could, have a epic, intense firefight. 64 players crammed around two MCOMs is just a clusterfuck. It's awful. And that's why I'm glad Rush died in Battlefield 4. Um, they ultimately found some solutions for this, namely the obvious one, which is restrict player counts by game type. Who could have thought that that would be a good idea? But in BF3, they didn't do that. Dam of Van Peak, terrible, terrible conquest map. It has the same problem as Metro. It has an okay designed, little play area at either end, just like Metro's street and park. But the middle, where most of the fighting happens, is a 3-lane choke point grenade fest, and it sucks ass. If you could, if the cliff above the tunnel were actually part of the map, and you could actually like climb up there, and there were paths, and you could have a fight for who's king of the hill, who could look down on the enemy and get the height advantage, then it actually might be a good map. But you can't. You are forced, despite the fact that there's helicopters that can go over top of the hill, you are forced to go through the tunnel. Can't go over the ridge. So it just turns into a clusterfuck, and it sucks. Other maps, let's take something like Noshar Canals. Noshar Canals is Noshar Canals actually reminds me of Firestorm in a weird way. In the sense that you have this big map, and it just seems to have random shit plopped in it. And there isn't a lot of, like, thought put into it, if you know what I mean. Like, Noshar Canals is, like, there's this port facility. You have this port facility, and then it just sort of ends, and then you have some grassy hills behind it. You get some grassy fields behind it. It looks really weird and unnatural. I'm not sure if it's supposed to be based on a real location or not, but it doesn't look like a real location. It looks like somebody built a port and then just gave up, and at the edge of the port, okay, there's some hills and fields now. It looks so unnatural. Like this port is just in the middle of nowhere, and there's no infrastructure or town built around it whatsoever. From a gameplay perspective, it's actually fine. I'm just saying it looks strange. Same with Firestorm. Firestorm plays all right, but it's the same thing. It looks weird. You have this big map with ridges and hills and vast open desert and a highway, but they plop all the flags in a strip right on either side of the highway in the very center of the map. And so you just have this vast empty space on either side where there's nothing going on and there's no reason to go there. There's just a bunch of, copy-pasted buildings slapped in the middle of it. And that's it. It looks very strange. Unlike Noshar Canals, however, the flag layout means that it doesn't play as well as it could. Noshar Canals plays out fine. Firestorm doesn't. I mean, it plays out fine in the sense that everybody crams into that center strip and the rest of the map is forgotten. But there's better, warehouse fights in the game. There's better construction site fights in the game. And that's what Firestorm is. It's a warehouse fight and a construction site fight, along with, running around the gangplanks on the oil refinery. If you want that, you can always play Terran Highway or Karg. There's all this map on Firestorm that's not used because if they were to spread the points out away from the highway, it wouldn't work in Rush anymore because it would be too spread out. So in order to keep it working for Rush, they put all the points in one strip on either side of the highway, and the rest of the map is pointless. I mean, the fight there is fine, but it always makes me think, why wouldn't I just play this Rush? What's the point of playing it on Conquest when it's basically just Rush, but you can go back and forth? because it's the same points, because the rest of the map still isn't used. The only part of the map that anybody uses outside of the points is the giant hill at the south end, because that's, Sniper Hill. That's where all the snipers go, because it's the highest point on the map. They don't usually do anything useful up there, but that's not really the point of sniping in Battlefield 3 anyway. You don't really accomplish anything useful by sniping. You do it because it's fun. Um, and yeah, you can have some fun sniping from up there, but again, you're not accomplishing anything. It would make far more sense for there to be a flag on the top of the mountain. You know, since it is the highest point on the map, it would make sense if there was a flag up there and there was actually a hill fight for it. But no, we can't have that because it's not next to the highway, which means that if we were to put an MCOM up there, it'd be too far from the MCOM on the other side of the highway. So there's no MCOM, and therefore there's no flag. So yet again, it's not as bad as Metro, which just straight up doesn't work as a conquest map. It still works as a conquest map, but it's total wasted potential. It's a total waste of what could be a good conquest map, right? If you were to spread those flags out, if you took that base at the north end and you put it farther out into the desert, if you took the construction site and pulled it a little farther south, if you put a flag on the mountain, if you spread the refinery out more, if you put more to it and spread it out farther to the other side of the highway, just spread this shit out a little more. It'd be great. As it is, meh. Now, I mentioned Karg. Karg Island is actually great as a conquest map, but again, it is gimped by the fact that the level design has been constrained by having to make everything work for Rush. So there's an entire half of the map, basically, where there's no flag. It's just a giant open ridge that serves as essentially a flank, a way to flank the enemy. Now, it doesn't quite work as that because it's so open that unless the enemy isn't paying attention, or they're really bad shots, you're going to get shot if you try and run across it. Granted, people often are bad shots and aren't looking, so you can run across it. But it's much safer to try and do so in a tank. But again, you see on Karg, all the points are shoved off to one side because that's the same area of the map that the NCOMs would be in. If we were to spread it out, the MCOMs would be on opposite sides of the map, and then we wouldn't have a focused experience, especially for the console version, since it only has 24 players. And we can't possibly have different versions for the console and PC versions, because then Microsoft and Sony would get on our asses about how their version of the game is inferior, and everybody's buying the PC version, and now people don't like our consoles, and oh no, it's not like Microsoft can't have more money. Anyway, there are good maps here, okay? Caspian Border is a good map. It's a classic straight-up conquest map. It works. Flags are decently spaced. Good fights between them. Good terrain differences. It's great. Heck, it's one of the few maps where you can actually camouflage yourself. If you pick the right camo, specifically some sort of woodland camo, and you prone down in amongst the bushes or the rocks, unless somebody hits Q on top of you, hard to see you. That's pretty nifty. Sand Crossing? Sand Crossing is actually fairly good. It's still a little too choke pointy. Okay, it's still a little too. There's still a lack of flanking routes. Or rather, I should say, the routes are all narrow, which means that if a bunch of people gang up on them, it becomes a clusterfuck. But it's much better than Damavand Peak Metro. And really, most of my dislike of Sen comes from the fact that I know that they can do better, mainly because Amiens is like Sen Crossing, but just like better, which is why everybody plays Amiens in Battlefield 1 all the time. And then there's the DLC maps. Now, on the one hand, you could say the close quarters maps were a mistake because that's not what Battlefield's about. On the other hand, back in Battlefield 3, as evidenced by the Noshar TDM crowd, which was quite considerable back in the day, I even, I even once tried my luck at joining that crowd, trying to become super serious, and becoming a really good, CQB Twitch shooter. It required more effort than I wanted to bother putting in for something that was supposed to be fun. So I got good at TDM and then ditched it. Just didn't care. Also, Nashar TDM, yes, it's a small map with a bunch of containers, and you get a lot of kills in a short amount of time, but the map design is terrible. Um, it's like the map's not designed for that. The close quarters maps, on the other hand, are designed for team deathmatch, and they work really well for team deathmatch. And frankly, the fact that Noshar TDM continued to be more popular than the close quarters maps after that DLC launched, I can only attribute to the fact that you had to pay for the close quarters maps. And a lot of people don't bother buying the DLC for Battlefield because they see it as a money grubbing game, which it is. No doubt, it is. Um, but those maps were for the TDM crowd, and they worked really well for the TDM crowd, and they played out really well for the TDM crowd. And they were all pretty good, all things considered. As TDM maps, they were really good. Then there was Back to Karkand, which was like this Battlefield 2 nostalgia pack. Um, and I would say that selling us maps that you already made, but you know, higher fidelity in a new game seems like kind of a cop out. But then again, given that they put Wake Island into like every well, I just shouldn't say every Battlefield game because they haven't, but they put it into a lot of Battlefield games, and it's like the same map every time. And also that you know, let's be honest, Battlefield 4 is not really some kind of massive innovation or change from Battlefield 3. It's kind of an iterative step. Selling us something that we already had before, but just a little different, is not unprecedented in this series, so it didn't bother me too much. Striking Karkin's still a great map. Even better now that there's no, now that everyone doesn't carry, 5 fucking grenades. Um, so that solves the grenade spam problem on the first point. I am disappointed that they removed the back two flags, the farthest two flags, because I guess they decided that they wouldn't fit on the UI, or they figured it was getting too big for the consoles, or whatever. That's a shame. The warehouse was always fun, but whatever. I don't know why they bothered with Gulf of Oman. I never really liked Gulf of Oman. Sharkey Peninsula was a good map. I'm glad they brought that back. For some reason, off the top of my head, I can't remember what the fourth one was. Oh, yeah, it was Wake Island. They brought back Wake Island and back to Kargan. Whatever. Anyway, then there was Armored Kill. A lot of people didn't like Armored Kill. They thought that the maps were too big, um, action wasn't focused enough, too many vehicles. That's probably because a lot of people are infantry players, and they probably came from Bad Company, or they came to Battlefield 3 first, and the base maps often emphasized infantry combat, and they didn't like all these vehicles running around just blowing them up all the time. I understand. I myself, in fact, am almost entirely an infantry player. I almost never play in vehicles. Despite that, I love Armored Kill. Um, or I should say I love half of Armored Kill. I think uh, Death Valley is a rather uninspired map. Other than the fact that it's at night, the map doesn't have much going for it. It's just some flags sprinkled about um, a mildly hilly landscape, and that's it. Like, there isn't much interesting about it. The flags are filled with copy pasted assets and whatnot. It's fairly uninspired. The only thing that makes it any different is that it's at night. Doesn't do much for me. It's not interesting. Bandar Desert is absolutely ridiculously huge. It's the largest map if you don't count the Battle Royale map from Battlefield 5, which I don't, because Battle Royale is not Battlefield, and I just personally don't count it. Bondar is, well, it's impressive in terms of its size. Um, that said, it still feels weird because of the because of the bifurcation where like the middle of the map has nothing in it, and there's just stuff all on the sides. Um, you never, if it feels like a very segregated map. Like all the infantry go to A, B, and C, right? The coast resort, and then all the vehicles fight it out between the other points in the desert. Um, and it doesn't feel like there's a lot of synergy going on. It doesn't feel often like a combined arms map, well, except for the aircraft, because infantry simply aren't viable on the desert half of the map, or I should say the most of the map, which is desert and mountains. Except when you actually get into like F, then infantry are useful there. But until you actually get to F, you're just a sitting duck. Um, Not the worst map ever, but again, I don't see it as particularly inspired other than, oh my god, it's huge. Um, Also, a lot of these maps um, sacrificed like having tanks on them for having tank destroyers. This was a new vehicle that they introduced um, for seemingly no reason. I have no idea why they exist. And so this is how you end up with Bondar Desert, largest map ever, only 2 tanks. Why? Because the other tanks that should spawn are tank destroyers instead of tanks. Why? I want a giant tank battle. Why do you have to throw in these completely unnecessary tank destroyers? I don't get it. On that note, I should also note the 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 one thing I absolutely detest about Armored Kill is the fucking AC-130. That is just like Levolution, uh, one of those, you know, trailer things that, oh look, it's so cool. Do you remember being the AC-130 gunner in COD 4? Everybody remembers being the AC-130 gunner in COD 4, so we're going to put the AC-130 in the game so that you can be like the AC-130 gunner in COD 4 and have fun like that again because everybody loved that section so much. In actuality, the thing's just cancer. All right, it has only 2 modes. Either it's just a giant XP pinata for enemy pilots because it's totally defenseless and you can't actually fly it yourself. It flies in a preset um, orbit, so you just fly around behind it and pump rounds into it until it blows up in a rather spectacular fashion. Um, or if your pilots don't care, or they're bad, so they're being, you know, continually demolished by the enemy pilots, and then the enemy has the AC-130 as well, then you just get randomly killed by these guys sitting up in the AC-130, and you can't do anything about them because your pilots suck. And it doesn't serve any purpose other than to try and basically recreate a multiplayer version of the AC-130 section from COD 4 because everybody liked that. It's totally pointless. It's cancerous, regardless of which extreme it's sitting at. It's not fun to play against or use, and it shouldn't be in the game. And I hate the fact that it's there. The only reason that Armored Kill works for me at all is because most of the time it is just a XP pinata and it gets destroyed immediately, and you never get killed by it because it never lasts longer than about a minute. But there's 2 maps from Armored Kill I really like. I really like Armored Shield. It is a sort of a classic tank map. Now, unfortunately, there aren't a lot of tanks on it because, again, they decided that they needed to use lots of tank destroyers instead for, again, reasons I don't understand. Um, but the map itself, in terms of the flag layout, the layout of the little hamlets, um, even in terms of just the layout of the vegetation, where the shrubs and trees are and the fences and, where the little bits of cover for hiding snipers or anti-tank infantry are, is great. You know, sneaking around on that map as a sniper or as a guy with a javelin, going from shrub to shrub, trying to get from E to D or sneak your way over to B or what have you, is a really fun time. Um, and obviously, as a tanker, it's great because it's open enough that you can always see. You have long sight lines. You can drive full speed all the time. Lots of vehicles to shoot at, but there's enough hidey holes for enemy infantry that um, you can't just go driving around blasting everything in sight like you can on Bandar Desert because there's lots of places they can hide. So you have to be careful. Um, yeah, I always loved Armored Shield. Again, I just wish there wasn't an AC-130. Other than that, I love the map. And then there's Alborz Mountain. Now, strictly speaking, you could make the argument that Alborz Mountain isn't a balanced map. Um, and it isn't really because the Russians have a blatant height advantage because they start behind the mountain, whereas the U.S. starts below the mountain. So, yes, the Russians kind of do have a blatant advantage. The U.S. will get A, B, and C. The Russians will get the other 4 points, and then the U.S. has to attack up the mountain um, to try and take D and E, and that doesn't always work. But despite the fact that it's not balanced, the actual flow of the map, how it actually plays out, combined with the sheer spectacle of it, I don't think a mountain has ever been as lovingly crafted and modeled and detailed as it is in uh, Alborz Mountain. It really looks and feels like an actual fucking mountain. It is large, it is imposing, it is intimidating, and it is a genuine journey uh, to travel up it. And fighting your way from the lake among the trees up, the slope among all the rocks and crevices and whatnot up to the top, where it just becomes a rat's nest of rocks, and there could be guys, there could be snipers behind every rock, every little outcrop. It's fantastic. Like in terms of the actual, like if you ignore the flag layout, which as I said is totally unbalanced, um, the actual just physical layout of the map and how the firefights play out, especially because it often restricts the mountain often restricts how tanks can maneuver, unlike the other maps where they basically are kings of the battlefield. Playing as an infantry player on Alborz Mountain is great. It's a great time as long as you don't mind getting sniped. Snipers have a really good time on Alborz Mountain, which is fine. It's a long range map. Sniping is a totally valid thing to do. Um, yeah, it's just an epic. Uh, it's an epic struggle on Alborz Mountain. It looks cool. If you like ranged combat, uh, it's fantastic. It's my favorite map of the pack. It's one of my favorites in the game only for that reason. As I said, it's not balanced at all. The flag layout would need to be redone in order to make it like an actually good map. This is more just my personal aesthetic bias towards um, towards the map. I don't have a lot to say about Aftermath only because all the maps in Aftermath are great. They're better than any of the maps in any of the base maps. Um, Frankly, they're not just the best maps in the game. They're some of the best maps in the entire Battlefield series. They are the best urban combat maps I think they've ever made. I mean, you could probably put Siege of Shanghai up there too, I suppose, Amiens. But these are genuinely large but complex, and I do mean complex, urban maps. Right? There's so many layers, so many routes, so many rooms, so many buildings, um, so many places to hide. There's so many places you can uh, go. There's so many routes to take. There's so many places to watch. There's so many flanking routes. It's they're I wouldn't I mean I probably shouldn't say they're perfect, but I have trouble finding any real problems with them. Um, they're brilliant. And I just wish we could see more level design like this from DICE more often. Endgame was forgettable. Um, I have no idea why those maps were made, other than we want to make more money. Very uninspired. They, something like KSR Railroad, you know, or what's the other one? Operation Riverside. Those maps very much remind me of um, Death Valley in their sort of lazy, uninspired level layouts with, you know, relatively uncomplicated, not very inspired terrain and sort of seemingly uninspired random building placement, and they're just not there's not much to them. The only the only one that has anything notable about it really is Nabandon Flats, and that's purely because the of how open the center of the map is, which means that assaulting D is a genuine challenge. Um, like you really have to carefully attack and assault D because you have to approach it off through these open, flat fucking fields where you either have to run and hope that they don't shoot you, or you have to crawl very slowly towards it before popping up at the last minute. But other than that one point in the middle, the rest of the map is totally forgettable. And one thing I do like about the DLCs for the game is that if you know what you like, you can buy the ones that cater specifically to what you like. So if you like TDM, if you were part of that crowd in Battlefield 3 that loved TDM, you could buy the close quarters maps. Everybody else didn't have to bother. You never had to play them. Didn't matter. If you like vehicle gameplay, if you like the big maps, if you wish that Operation Firestorm was like a proper big map with flags all over the place, you can buy Armored Kill. Those maps are for you. Everybody else doesn't have to buy them. Everybody, should buy Aftermath because Aftermath has the greatest maps in the game. Um, like they're genuinely fantastic. And then I have no idea why you would buy um, Endgame because those maps are really boring and don't really offer anything new or interesting in terms of gameplay variety. And back to Carpenter's a nostalgia trip, so anybody who played Battlefield 2 will snatch it up instantly. Everybody else, maybe they don't care, so they don't bother. Or maybe they do care and they want to see what they missed. So I do like that. On the other hand, there's a reason everyone hated the premium model. It was blatant money grabbing. It meant that you paid. It, it meant that unless you bought premium, which meant that you basically doubled the price of the game, and that was basically buying stuff for a game before you knew what it was going to be. It's basically pre-ordering, but for DLC. Um, so you didn't know if what you were paying for was actually worth it. If you didn't buy premium, you had to buy them individually, and if you bought them individually, they cost way more. So you would end up spending more money if you actually did like it, even if you would end up spending less if you didn't like it. Um, so it was a blatant, money grabbing scheme, and so a lot of people didn't buy the DLC, and I don't blame them for it. And I, if, I was younger then, and I was more impulsive, and I bought all the DLC for Battlefield 3 because I love Battlefield, and so I just bought everything for it. Shouldn't have done that. Battlefield 4, I didn't. I didn't buy a single piece of DLC for Battlefield 4 until they were all put on sale for like I forget it was what was it like $10 for all of them at some point a few years back, and I was like, oh fuck yeah, all the DLC for $10, why not? Um, Same thing with Battlefield 3. Didn't sorry, Battlefield 1 didn't buy the DLC until they put it all on sale for $10, or I guess it was 15. Because when you know that, because after Battlefield 3, and I knew that they were eventually going to do that, they would sell you all the DLC for way cheaper. I was like, why the fuck would I buy it on release? It costs you several times more money. It's stupid. So I didn't. Um, Unfortunately, what that means is that for people who don't buy the DLC, you're stuck with the vanilla maps, and the vanilla maps in Battlefield 3 are. It's a mixed bag. Some are good. Well, I'd say a few are good. Caspian Border is good. Sand Crossing is good. Nushar Canals is pretty good. Operation Firestorm is all right. It's more missed opportunity than anything. Karg Island is, again, all right. Missed opportunity. Tehran Highway is uninspired. Metro is terrible. Damavand is terrible. Bazaar is good, but only for TDM. And I should say Damavand Peak and, well, no, I shouldn't. Damavand Peak and Metro work for Rush, but only on lower player counts, which there was no way to force. So playing on PC, I never, almost never saw lower player count Rush. So they were clusterfucks even in Rush. So they were still terrible. Overall, a mixed bag. The DLC was definitely better than the base game. That is unfortunately a rather common trend in EA games. Thinking of Dragon Age Inquisition. I should mention as a final thing, yeah, the gunplay's fine. The netcode's crap, but the gunplay's good. Assault is still the best class. The class balance was kind of out of whack because it was basically if there were vehicles around, you used an engineer. Otherwise, Assault was a no-brainer. You had the best guns in the game and like the most general purpose guns in the game, and you could heal yourself. Support was only really for people who either just like machine guns because they have big mags, or because you didn't want to rely on your teammates for ammo, which is totally a legitimate concern. And recon was for fun. It didn't have much utility in close quarters unless you specifically used a PDW instead of a sniper rifle. But that's fine. Sniping in Battlefield usually has been just for fun. But like I said, Battlefield lives and dies on its maps, and Battlefield 3, while not terrible, especially at launch, had some pretty poorly thought out, let's say, maps. I would say that Aftermath is the epitome of urban combat in Battlefield. But vanilla Battlefield 3, Grand Bazaar, even Sand Crossing, no. No. Not at all. I think that's I think that's looking back on it through rose-tinted glasses. If you've played Amiens, Sand Crossing, if you play Sand Crossing, it's just like, oh, it's Amiens but worse. And as I said, Grand Bazaar just isn't a conquest map. In the future, I'll probably do a video about, maybe not about Battlefield 4, because admittedly, this is part of the problem with buying the DLC so late. I bought the DLC so late that I haven't played a lot of the DLC maps because nobody plays them. whenever people get to vote for the maps, they almost never vote for anything from China Rising. I've heard those are terrible. Or Naval Strike. So, or even Final Stand often doesn't get chosen. So I haven't played a lot of those maps almost at all. So I don't feel qualified to talk about Battlefield 4. So if I talk about another Battlefield game, it'll probably be Battlefield 1. And I actually, spoiler alert, controversial opinion, I like Battlefield 1 better. But that's for another video.